I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing the same dish for the second time without noticing, when my sister said something that stopped me cold. I was on the phone with her, had been for nearly 20 minutes, and I was explaining a decision I had already made. A small one. Something that didn't even involve her. And she interrupted me, gently, and said, "Maggie, I wasn't questioning you. I was just asking how your week went." I stood there holding that dish. Nobody had asked me to explain. Nobody was disagreeing with me. I had just offered up all those reasons, one after another, to a woman who hadn't requested a single one of them. And I realized standing there at that sink with the water going cold on my hands, that I had been doing that for years. Explaining myself. Justifying myself. Shrinking my choices down into something other people could be comfortable with. I was 63 years old. And I was still asking the room if it was okay for me to be myself. That was the afternoon something shifted. Not dramatically. Not in some grand way. Just quietly. The way light changes in late October, you don't notice it moving. You just look up one day and realize the whole world looks different. Before I go any further, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Leave your city and state in the comments below. Reading your messages every week reminds me just how many good people gather here. It means more to me than you know. My mother used to sit at the kitchen table in the mornings with her coffee and the newspaper, and the sunlight would come through the window at an angle that lit up the whole room. I can still see it. She was a good woman. Hardworking. Fair. But she had opinions about most things: what you wore, who you spent time with, why you made the choices you made, and those opinions had a way of filling a room before you could get your own thoughts in. So I learned early to come prepared. To have my reasons ready before she could ask. To frame things in a way she could accept. It was just survival, really. You learn what the house needs from you, and you give it. The trouble is that skill followed me everywhere. Into my marriage. Into friendships. Into conversations I was having at 60 years old with people who weren't my mother and never had been. What I slowly came to understand is that explaining yourself isn't always honesty. Sometimes it's a very old habit of seeking permission you no longer actually need. And the hardest part about realizing that? It meant I had to ask myself when, exactly, I had stopped trusting my own judgment. And I didn't have a clean answer. Here's something I didn't understand for a long time. When you over-explain, you're not being considerate. You're being apologetic. There's a difference. I had a friend for years, a woman I'd known since our kids were in grade school together. Whenever I made a decision she didn't immediately understand, I'd call her and unpack the whole thing. The reasoning. The alternatives I'd considered. All of it. One afternoon, I told her I'd decided to paint the living room a deep gold. I remember standing at the window with the paint chip in my hand, already building my case. "A little bold, don't you think?" she said. "Well, I thought about it for a while," I said. "And the room faces north, so it needs the warmth, and Warren always liked warm colors, and I figured." "Maggie," she said, "it's your house." She meant it kindly. But I was so deep in justifying myself that I almost missed what she was really saying. It's your house. You don't need a reason. You just need to like it. I eventually realized I didn't feel close to her in those conversations. I felt evaluated. Like I was sitting for a test I hadn't agreed to take. And that's not friendship. That's something else entirely. The question I started asking myself, and it helped more than I expected, was this. Is this person someone whose opinion I've actually earned the right to care about? Or am I just afraid of what they'll think? Those are two very different feelings. One comes from love. The other comes from a habit that got started a long time ago and never really stopped. After Warren passed, I used to fold laundry in the evenings just to have something to do with my hands. That's a small thing, but I remember it clearly. The house was so quiet in the evenings that I needed a task. Something with a beginning and an end. Folding a shirt, setting it on the pile, picking up the next one. And during that time, I felt like I had to explain everything I did. Every errand. Every small choice. Where I'd been, why I'd gone, whether it was too soon to rearrange the living room or too late to finally call someone back. I think grief does that. You lose your footing and you start reaching for people to confirm that you're still doing things right. That you're still, somewhere in all of it, okay? I remember the first time I booked a trip by myself. A long weekend in San Antonio. Nothing grand. I called my daughter to tell her about it, and I heard myself start in the cost, the timing, why I thought I was ready, why it wouldn't be too hard. She stopped me. Mama, you don't have to justify it. Do you want to go? I do, I said. Then go. I'll water your plants. Sometimes the people who love you are just waiting for you to believe in yourself the way they already do. They're not asking for the reasons. They never were. That was a small thing. A 2-minute phone call. But I have carried it with me ever since. Here's the thing that surprised me most when I started paying attention to this habit. Most of the explaining I was doing wasn't happening out loud at all. It was happening in my own head. In the middle of the night. While I was driving to the grocery store. While I was sitting on the porch watching the birds at the feeder. I would make a choice, sometimes a private one, something nobody even knew about, and then spend hours rehearsing how I'd defend it if someone asked. Building a case for a jury that had never assembled. Building arguments for a courtroom that didn't exist. One evening, I caught myself doing it while I was just deciding whether to plant tomatoes or zinnias along the back fence. Tomatoes, I thought, and then immediately started composing the explanation. They're practical. You get something from them. It's not frivolous. Frivolous. For zinnias. In my own backyard. With nobody watching. That's when I understood something I've never quite forgotten. We carry audiences inside our heads that stopped watching us a long time ago. And we keep performing for them anyway. I want to ask you something, and I mean it gently. Who is sitting in that audience in your head? When you second-guess yourself, when you feel that pull to justify a perfectly ordinary decision, whose voice do you hear? Take a moment with that. Because the answer has a way of telling you something important. For me, the voice was my mother's. And my mother had been gone for 11 years. I had been explaining myself to a woman who couldn't hear me anymore. And somehow, that was the most freeing thing I had ever realized. The spring after Warren died, I bought 3 rose bushes from the nursery on Route 36. The woman at the checkout asked what occasion they were for, and I said, no occasion. I just want them. She smiled and wrapped them in paper, and that was that. I planted them along the back fence on a Saturday afternoon. Got my hands dirty. Took longer than I expected. And I didn't mention them to anyone for nearly 3 weeks, not because I was hiding anything, but because I didn't feel like explaining them. They were just mine. Then one morning I came outside in my slippers, coffee in hand, and the first one had opened overnight. Just one bloom. Small, deep pink, slightly crooked on the stem. I stood there for a long time. The coffee went warm and then cool. A mockingbird somewhere behind the fence was working through its whole catalog. The light was doing that low early morning thing it does in May, where everything looks a little golden and a little unreal. And I thought, this is what peace actually feels like. Not happiness exactly. Just the quiet absence of the need to convince anyone, including yourself. When I finally put down the habit of over-explaining, not perfectly, not overnight, but little by little, I found I had more energy, more clarity. I started making decisions that felt cleaner, because I was making them for myself instead of shaping them in advance to be defensible. The room that opened up inside me wasn't empty. It was just finally quiet. I can hear some of you asking, well, Margaret, so when do you speak? When do you share something? Because you can't just go quiet on everyone. And you're right. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I learned is that there's a difference between sharing and explaining. Sharing comes from wanting to bring someone into your life. Explaining comes from needing them to approve of it. The feeling is different. Sharing feels like opening a window. Explaining feels like standing at a closed door. After that San Antonio trip, I called my daughter when I got home. Not to report back. Not to prove the trip had been worth it. Just because I wanted to tell her about the little restaurant I'd found on the river walk, the one where the waiter remembered I'd left my cardigan and ran after me with it in the rain. Mama, that's the sweetest thing, she said. That was sharing. That was just 2 people who love each other. No courtroom. No jury. Just a phone call on a Sunday evening. I've also learned to let some things simply exist without words. My routines. My quiet mornings. My rose garden. Not everything needs to be offered up. Some things are just yours, and keeping them that way isn't selfishness. It's self-respect. If you've spent years explaining yourself to people, pre-defending decisions, rehearsing arguments in the shower, building cases for juries that never show up, I want you to know that I understand that from the inside. I lived there for a long time, and it is exhausting in a way that's hard to name until you've stepped out of it. You're allowed to make decisions without an audience. You're allowed to change your mind without a press release. You're allowed to plant 3 rose bushes along the back fence simply because one afternoon you wanted something beautiful to look at. No reason required. I still catch myself sometimes, starting to explain when nobody asked. And I just stop, set the thought down, take a breath, and I think about that May morning, the mockingbird, the coffee going cool, the one small crooked bloom. Nobody watching, nobody needed, just me and my garden and a life that belongs, finally, to the person who's been living it all along. The most peaceful I have ever felt is when I understood that my choices don't need a defense, they just need to be mine. And if there's one thing I'd want you to carry from this conversation today, it's this. The quieter you become about your own life, the more clearly you can hear what you actually want from it. Thank you for sitting with me today. I'll be right here next week.